When did you start doing the caricaturing book? When what was that adventure like?
Well, for so long, I was training live artists and I didn't have a manual. I used Fozen's manual that I learned from. Over the years, like had my own approach and own way to teach people, and that wasn't in Fozen's manual. And I kept on, I would say, well, this isn't in the manual, but, and then when I trained them, I would talk about it. And, I got to the point where I was like, you know what, I really ought to put this together as a real manual. And then I thought, well, maybe I should just write a damn book and go ahead and do it. And I started doing these tutorials on my blog,
I remember them.
drawing eyes, the 5 shapes, all that sort of stuff were part of what I had kind of developed teaching live caricature. And I don't remember if it was at an NCN convention or ISCA convention or what, but Celestia Ward, the caricature artist.
Good person.
Yeah, terrific person. She approached me and said, before in my previous life, I was a book editor and an editor for a company out in Baltimore or somewhere in that area. You need to write a book on how to draw caricatures, and I want to edit it for you. And I said, wow, well, I'll take you up on that, when the time comes. She eventually, I think she just decided that I needed a fire put under me in order to motivate myself to actually do this. And so she started, I wouldn't call it harassing me, but she definitely kept that buzz in my ear about doing this book. And eventually I just decided, you know what? I've just got to do it. And this is the way it works for me is I'll want to do something. I'll think about doing something. I'll intend to do something and I won't get around to doing it. And then one day I just say, that's it. I've got to do it. And I put aside everything else and I do it. And that's what happened with the book. I had to turn down a bunch of jobs and I went to a coffee shop 3 days a week for probably 2 or 3 hours a day and wrote the book. So I got out of the studio, no drawing stuff around me, turned off my phone, and I started writing the book, and I would send her, the stuff that I was putting together. And then eventually, like most jobs, it reached a point of critical mass where it was like, okay, now I've got to finish it or it'll drive me crazy. So it took about 3 months, I think, beginning to end.
That's still pretty good.
For me to write it. And I was working on it a lot. Like it was definitely a big part of my week. And then it took me a little bit longer to illustrate it. So I think it was probably about 6 months total before it finally went to press. And this was before crowdfunding, right? So I footed the bill for the entire thing. Like I paid for the printing it was printed in Korea at the time. And was a total leap of faith. Like I'm ordering, 3,000 copies of this book. I don't know if I'll still have all, 2,500 copies of it when I'm 90 years old, but it was a big investment. And, I got the book over here and it's actually just did my 13th printing of it. So it's been going pretty well.
Was it hard for you to translate your ideas on how you do things into words?
Yes. Yeah. That was very hard. And I fortunately, I spent all those years teaching, live caricature artists at the parks. So I had a nice fundamental kind of idea of how to approach it, but I didn't want this to be a live caricature manual. I wanted it to be a book about caricature that you could apply the ideas to any kind of caricature. So live caricature or illustration or, realistic painting or crazy cartoon drawing stuff that I really wanted to impart, the information I wanted to impart would work on for kind of any style or any approach. Of course, then I also taught my particular style and approach to drawing it, the different features and stuff. And then I did do a live caricature chapter and a chapter on illustration and that sort of thing. But that was really hard, and that's something that the workshops too that I do have really helped me. When you're an artist, you do what you do, and maybe you don't have a real explanation for why you do it until you find the need to explain to somebody why you do it. And then you have to examine your own process and go, well, why do I do that? How can I explain what I'm thinking? What am I thinking when I'm doing this? And in a way, it's very helpful for me in my own work because I kind of wrap my head around things, a little bit more, and I understand my own process better, and it's less instinctual and more logical. And then I think it's helped me in many ways to better understand what I do and how I do it and why I do it. And I think it's helped me do my work better.
Was there anything in particular that you found resolution on how to explain it that you're just like still proud of?
In the book, probably the concept of the five shapes and the T shape, and kind of explaining how that dynamic works and how you need to simplify your thinking about those shapes and think about the relationships between them and exaggerating those relationships. And that's really the foundation of any caricature. That's probably the thing that was all me that I came up with for the book. It has since been usurped by a gazillion people that teach caricature, which is fine.
So was the T shape your idea or was that Fozen's idea?
No, that was mine.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah, that was something that you hear people talk sometimes about the triangle, and that relationship and relating it. But for me, it always was that, the T shape in terms of being not a three-dimensional, but a two-dimensional shape where there's thickness. The arms have thickness and the stem has thickness or thinness. And so it incorporates the three shapes into one shape. And it's especially useful when doing live work, I think, because it really simplifies. Head shape, T shape is basically what I think about instantly when I look at somebody. And then, I build the whole caricature around that observation.
So one thing I learned when I'm doing these YouTube tutorials, it's like one to translate what you're doing is hard. It's just it's a little bit of a challenge. And then sometimes you kind of diverge and you're like, this is a good idea. And it comes to you. I don't know if you really apply it or not, but when it's made into words, then it's always being applied. Do you feel like that for the T shape?
Yeah, I think just that's a good example of what you probably are doing instinctually that you now have a label for and kind of an idea of, you know, concrete idea of what that is. And that just helps you be consistent with it, and understand what you're doing with it. And the other thing that isn't in the book that is a product of my teaching the workshops is the whole concept of the under caricature and the surface caricature and how exaggeration is applied to the physical elements of a person's face and then their what I call their presence, and that those are two different elements that you apply exaggeration to. So that the physical elements are just your face. You got a big nose, you got a big nose. You got tiny little eyes, you got tiny eyes. Those are physical. And the exaggeration's all about the physical nature of the face. But I've come to realize that it's the exaggeration of the presence of the personality of the person. That's where really powerful caricature happens. And so your exaggeration choices based on personality are separate from the ones that you do based on physical features. So it's entirely possible if somebody's a very outgoing, smiley, dazzling smile sort of person, but they've actually got a tiny little mouth in the middle of this great big giant face. To choose to exaggerate the smile as really big, even though they have a smaller mouth, in order to capture that person's personality. So your exaggeration choices can sometimes fly in the face of the physical ones if your goal is to exaggerate the personality or the presence of the person. And I think those choices are more powerful than how big somebody's ears are.
Yeah. I
Because
mean, honestly, that's life.
yeah,
I always tell people your physical appearance becomes less important the longer you get to know somebody. And then it's just like you're saying, it's a presence, a personality that it's something in the air. I
Mhm.
remember when we were doing your workshop and you told the story of you went to an open casket and you saw the person, you known him for a while, and you looked down and there was nothing there. You're like, this don't even look like the guy. Even though the features were all there,
Right.
their personality, their soul per se was gone. And I think people underestimate that. And that's one reason why I love caricature. It kind of teaches a lot of people think it's about picking on you or
Right.
making you look ugly. But there's a lesson in it for sure about being like, hey, this whole physical appearance, this vanity that you hide in such high regard doesn't mean as much as you think it does.
Right.
And I think that's why the humor of caricature exists because humor is pointing out a reality that you didn't even know existed sometimes. So when it's really pointed out, it makes it a little bit more funny because you're like, you look at some like me, somebody draws me looking like a vampire mosquito. I'm gonna laugh because yeah, that's how I look, but that's not me,
Yeah.
you know? So I really appreciate that lesson for caricature.